Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Fully Managed and MetrixData joint webinar. Today's topic will be how to save money on software contracts during a crisis. Our speakers today will be Rob Voss, Senior Vice President at Fully Managed. Rob has spent his entire career in the software industry, bringing solutions and services that provide organizations with real value and realized ROI from their software investment. Mike Austin is the founder and CEO of MetrixData 360. Mike has been involved in more than $1.5 billion of software contract negotiations, audit defense engagements, and is an industry leader in creating and implementing best practices around software asset management for some of the largest companies in the world. So without further ado, I'll pass the mic over to Rob Voss to get things started.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Jay. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you folks on your webinar today. Real quick, in terms of Fully Managed, we're a Canadian-based organization, coast to coast in 7 offices, 300 employees, and over 2,000 customers. So we've been in inception for the last 15 years and focusing on helping clients automate business processes, providing enterprise service management strategy solution for internal customers as well as your external customers. Our area that we focus on, we've seen, as Jay mentioned, in terms of the area of helping organizations around realizing value, putting in best practices around ITAM and SAM. So out of our 2,000 customers, we're a strategic partner for ServiceNow and focus primarily on helping organizations use that innovative platform for ITAM and SAM in terms of best practices. Next slide, please. As we look and help clients, it is truly a people, process, and technology approach when we look at software asset management and IT asset management. As much as we offer in business automation and workflows around IT service management and an IT service management out to the business called enterprise service management for business, finance, and other areas of the organization, and build out those business processes and help on productivity and look at an operation management side, what we're finding is during this whole crisis, people are realizing from an IT asset management, software asset management, how do I help build a better strategy? How do I provide risk mitigation? How do I drive out costs in terms of my management of inventory on-prem and cloud-based software? So our approach is always, again, people, process, and technology, and helping from a consultative approach around the whole life cycle and helping organizations through the whole journey. I've been working with Mike Austin and Jay in the MetrixData 360 for their inception. Great organization, very focused around software asset management. They are the de facto when we look at coast to coast with all our strategic customers, from small, medium business to our largest enterprise customers. So very fortunate to be here today and to pass it over to Mike to walk through kind of the message for today. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. To the next slide here. So one of the things that, before I get started, I'll say that I've had a lot of conversations that have sort of shifted over the last couple of weeks for obvious reasons, but a couple of things that we're hearing is that during these times, budgets obviously have been decreased. Our procurement organizations or our procurement customers, as well as even our IT clients, are being asked to find savings in ways that they've never done before. I had a conversation with a client the other day that said basically he's been tasked with finding $5 million of savings out of their software contracts. And his question to me was, how do I do that when nothing's up for renewal? We're not buying anything new and nothing's up for renewal. I'm in all these contracts. How do I go and find savings? And what I had said to him is there's a couple of things that you'll notice that are happening, kind of broadly across the market right now. So first off, there's organizations that are, kind of stuck in inertia, or people within organizations that are stuck in inertia, just not sure what to do. They've shifted from working in the office to working at home. They're trying to get accustomed to all of this, watching the news, dealing with the kids at home and all of that. And, that is a large percentage of the people. And what I had told them is that coming out of, 2008, which was different but somewhat similar, organizations that worked really hard and took a data-driven approach, which is what we're going to talk about today, were able to work with their vendors to actually put themselves in a better position. So all of that what we're going to talk about today, and I put up a little bit of a disclaimer here, is that these tactics actually work whether we're in times of crisis or whether, or not. But the reality is these are not easy to be done. Your software vendors are not going to want to decrease revenue that they have on their books today, but it can be done. You just have to work really hard. You have to negotiate really hard, and you have to do that with a visibility into the data, knowing what you need, being very clear in terms of what you're looking for. And the people that work the hardest during this time are going to come out of this the best in the end, because they're going to reset their contracts, they're going to get everything set up, and they're going to find those savings that they're being asked to find. And so I put together for this customer specifically, basically a number of ideas that we see that would work during these times. And so I'm going to run through exactly what I'd suggested to this client, and that they're already implementing and actually starting to get some success with it. So the first thing that I would say is review all your maintenance contracts. So there's a lot of maintenance that we find procurement and IT don't even necessarily actively manage. And so these are support contracts for software technologies, could be going on for 10 years. One that we recently looked at was an open text contract that was signed 10 years ago. They were getting $1 million a year in support, and they were paying, $1 million a year in support. Nobody ever looked at it. It just sort of was something that they paid, had an annual price increase on it, kind of went up every year, but they just continued to pay it. When we dug into it, what we found was they were paying $1 million a year for 3 support calls. It was a technology that they weren't updating. They were basically 5 versions behind. Now, in this case, they were coming up on renewal, but even if they weren't, you'd be looking at the next renewal. And then they started asking some really hard questions of open text around why are we paying $1 million a year for 3 support calls? And so what I would say is take a look at all your contracts where you have maintenance and start looking at what are you actually using those software contracts for, or what are you actually getting out of them? Because a lot of the software vendors, it is just sort of support contracts, and maybe those things can be reduced or eliminated depending on what you're doing, and you can take some some really educated risks around potentially dropping some support. So the first thing I said is, go out and figure out where all your maintenance contracts are, when they are, and what, then start looking into how they're being used and who's managing them, and kind of get a little bit of an understanding of the products. I guarantee you that scenario that I used around the open text, most organizations are going to have 1 or 2 vendors that they're just paying software contracts for, maintenance contracts for, whether it's few $1,000s to millions of dollars, that they probably could easily look at potentially dropping. So that's the first area we suggest that they go look. The second one was to look at any subscription contracts and reductions associated with them. So I'll use an example here of Microsoft and their Office 365 products. So certain Office 365 products you may be actually able to reduce. Now, that might not be able to be done until your anniversary date, because typically with Microsoft, you sort of prepaid for the year unless you're doing some reservations. But if you're starting to look at your subscription contracts, and can you actually reduce those, and when can you reduce them? So go out and read your contracts when it comes to subscriptions, and start figuring out what the timeframes around reductions are, and what are the limitations on reduction. So again, with Microsoft here, if we take Office 365, your E's, like your E1s, your E3s, those are enterprise products. So if I signed for 1,000, I can't go below 1,000. They kind of leave me there. But if I had grown to 1,500 and I'm coming up to a 2nd or 3rd anniversary, and I'm now down to the requirements of 1,000, on my anniversary, it can reduce to 1,000. Any of the other subscriptions, the additional products or additional online subscriptions, as they call them, those you can actually reduce to 0 on any anniversary. You just got to do it within 30 to 60 days according to the contract. So, your project onlines, your Visio onlines, any of the sort of add-ons, if you're not using all of those, that's a great area to go and look to get some reductions. Other contracts are the same. So again, you have to go out and read the contract, understand when you can reduce, what you can reduce, and then if it's not in the right time frames, start brainstorming ways to get your vendor to agree to allow you to reduce. So again, subscriptions, they have that naturally. Usually the vendors don't like you to go down, but there are provisions in contracts that allow you to do that, and understanding those clauses is definitely an area to look. The third one that I would say is renegotiate your pre-committed cloud spends. So a lot of the times if you're signing big contracts with like AWS or Azure or Google, they're pre-commitments. I'm going to give you $1 million this year. You commit to $1 million. You then consume and draw down on that. Now they do have pay-as-you-go pay-as-you-go options as well, but we're talking here on these pre-committed ones. So if we pre-commit it to $1 million to spend, let's say with AWS this year in order to get some discounts, but now based on sort of what's gone on, we're not going to get there. Maybe we're only going to get to 500,000 or 750,000. Can you actually then go and work with AWS or Microsoft or even Google to have them push that out? So go and say, look, based on the times, maybe we can't reduce our 3-year spend. We were going to give you $3 million over 3 years. We still will, but our timeframes have changed. So can we decrease our commitment this year from $1 million to 500,000 and push that other 500,000 into next year or into the the third year of the contract? So again, go and look at where you pre-committed spend, particularly with your cloud deployments, and look at potentially trying to push that out. Another thing to start looking at is looking at what you actually have deployed in the cloud to ensure you're using it. If you're not using it, shut it off so that you don't pay for it, right? So I kind of say that jokingly, but we see it all the time. So when times are good, people are just running these systems, they're paying for them, but now's a really good time to start taking a look at those things to see, are they running? Are they still in use? Was it a dev box that got put up that nobody's using anymore so we can shut it down and quit paying for it? Is it an application that we only need to run 9 to 9, but we've been running it 24 hours a day? Can we shut it off from 9 to 9 so that we save 12 hours of consumption? Those are the sorts of things you want to be looking at now. The fourth is if you take a look at something, you realize, look, there's a reduction that could be to be had there, but I'm in the middle of a contract. Maybe I'm in the second year of my Microsoft contract. Can I open it up? Right, is a way to maybe work with Microsoft in order to get some reductions. Currently, maybe it's to open it up and renew it and extend it out a couple more years. So that I can maybe get Microsoft to agree to reductions in exchange for a couple of extra years, right? And so, that's one way to work with the vendor to kind of say, okay, I see some things, I'm in the middle of a contract, instead of saying I can't do anything, let's go and take a look at those contracts and say, hey, can I renew it early? Can maybe I take it as it's a 3-year deal now? Can I tack another couple of years onto the back end of it to make it a 5-year deal? And see if that actually works as a way to potentially extend these things out and then right size them as a part of that negotiation. So again, this is a tactic. What you're looking here to do is to open up the dialogue with the vendor to open up those negotiations. Another thing that we suggest is, around that maintenance cost. I think point 1 was to look at maintenance, but another thing to look at is the maintenance costs versus rebuy scenarios. It's quite frequent that we see maintenance on products where, originally you bought it, it was 22% maintenance per year of the license cost, but it had a 5% year-over-year price increase. You bought it 15 years ago and you just keep paying the 5% year over year or whatever it is. When you look at some of those, there are scenarios quite often where your maintenance costs have now become more expensive than actually doing a rebuy of the license. I know it sounds sort of counterintuitive, but you really want to take a look at those maintenance costs. So maybe you've gone out in step 1, found all your maintenance contracts, found some that you can't reduce. Those ones, maybe what you want to take a look at is, what is the cost to rebuy? Because not only is it that maybe because of price increases, it's gone, to the point where a rebuy makes more sense, but it quite possibly, and in today's world, quite often they've changed the licensing so much that you bought it 10 years ago, you were paying on a certain license metric. Now things has changed. Maybe they've moved to the cloud, or their incentive to move you to the cloud. So maybe there's an opportunity to get out of the support costs on the maintenance and do a net new buy and move to a new license metric that'll actually save you cost. Now, a lot of vendors, that strategy actually works very well because the maintenance teams and your sales teams don't get paid on each other's stuff. So Oracle's a great example there, where Oracle maintenance, your Oracle rep does not get paid to renew maintenance. That's the maintenance renewal team. So if you actually cancel your maintenance and rebuy, if that makes sense, your Oracle sales team will work with you on that rebuy, because that actually helps them retire quota, where just renewing the maintenance does not. So again, go out there, and again, it takes work. You've got to take a look at it. You've got to do the analysis. But again, look at those maintenance contracts to see if they are now more expensive than doing a rebuy, or if there's some other scenario that makes sense, maybe moving from perpetual to subscriptions, to the cloud, or new license metrics. The sixth is one that we always talk to our clients about, and quite often we're told, no, we can't do this, but we've actually had a couple come back to us in the last couple of weeks right around this here, where there might be an opportunity to re-architect how you're doing things today in order to save money. So a great example could be that, with a SQL environment, or your Microsoft Windows environment, you've got production and development sort of mixed. It's not optimized. And so maybe now's the time to finally go out and build that dev cluster, where you can isolate all your development into a dev cluster and reduce the actual number of licenses that are required. So now is a great time. The IT departments maybe have a little bit more bandwidth now that they've sort of gotten through the initial hurdle of onboarding all the employees to work at home, to actually look at things like re-architecting things to see if there's an opportunity to save money. We had a client that on the Windows support needed to get 2008 extended support. It was like $3 million that they needed to spend, and we were sort of making some recommendations right around this, around moving a couple of their 2008s off of some clusters so they didn't have to license the whole cluster, put it on another cluster and that was already licensed, and they wouldn't have had to pay. And they were told no. The infrastructure and the VMware teams just said, nope, can't do it, no capacity. Then the crisis hit, and they actually were able to make the changes in 3 days when they actually were, determined that they need to focus on cost savings. So if you've had thoughts of, we could re-architect this and it would save us money, now is probably a good time to go work with the appropriate stakeholders to see if that's actually possible now, because there's definitely opportunities here. This one here, I've sort of alluded to it a little bit, but I would say with any of your big software spends, go out there and take a look at your software contracts and read the language around how you can license things. So a lot of the times people buy on one license metric. So maybe you're buying on a user basis, but there's another metric like a processor based or revenue based, or, there's all kinds of different license metrics. And so quite often when we bought these software products, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and we're still paying support on them, we bought on one license metric, but maybe there's a newer license metric or other ones that make more sense. So, now's a great time to take a look at some of those bigger ones and look at, can I switch to a different license metric? And I'm going to talk about how this worked at a client as an example here in a little bit, but this is a great one to look for newer licensing models or other licensing models that you weren't doing, and actually running some analysis to see if there's a different way to be doing it and if it's cheaper, and then you can make those switches. The great thing about this one is a lot of the times, now again, it's going to be depending on when your anniversary dates are and things like that, but a lot of the times this is just programmatic, and it's not even a negotiation. It's just, I'm doing this, I'm going to buy this license type now. So this is a good one to be looking at as well. The second one is to start looking at your support and maintenance contracts for unneeded licenses. I had a conversation just yesterday about this with a client where they've got a bunch of support contracts where they're paying for licenses that have long been retired, but there's no mechanism to, kind of get that stuff out. They don't let you reduce it, or they'll reprice it, then it's the same price anyways. We've all heard it. The reality is you can work with your vendors to do that. It's not easy. I'll be honest, it's not easy. But if you've got the good data, you've got the information, you can do it. Maybe you can trade it in for stuff that you actually can use. You can get some reductions there. There are strategies to get them off of those contracts. Sometimes those strategies take a little bit more time than maybe we want right now, but there are definitely strategies that can be used to move licenses off of support contracts so that you're not paying for stuff that you don't need. And now's maybe a good time to start looking at how you can do that and brainstorming on ways that you can do that. Now, each vendor, there's different tactics that you can use to do this. A lot of the times, Oracle's a great example here. I've got a bunch of licenses on a CSI. I don't need it anymore, but Oracle's going to reprice the entire CSI if I drop the 10 licenses that I don't require. So I'm just paying for them because I have to. Well, you don't have to. There's definitely strategies to get those off of those CSIs without penalty. It just takes a lot of maneuvering and some timing to figure out how to do it and to work it through the process. But you definitely can do that. This one is a little bit less around licensing, but more around taking a look at your environment. So, we have our friends from Fully Managed on today. They do ServiceNow. We do work with ServiceNow SAM and other SAM tools. But if you've got a SAM tool in place, you can go and take a look at where there's duplicate functionality in the environment and see if you can start reducing some of the software products out of your environment. A good example is, a lot of organizations now own Microsoft 365. Maybe now's the time to reconsider whether you need to have McAfee's endpoint or whether Microsoft's ATP can replace it now and remove something out of the environment. With this move to home, one of the things that we see quite a bit, we saw it before, but is duplication in the various what do I want to call them, like Teams and Zoom and WebEx, and we see companies have multiples of those. Well, having multiples of those costs money, so maybe now is the time to start taking the data in around how many people we have using Zoom and Blue Jeans and Teams and WebEx, and then start thinking through how do we which one do we want to pick as a standard, and then how do we negotiate a better deal to sort of centralize those, maybe get it down from 4 to 2 in order to get some synergies and some pricing there. But this goes for everything. I mean, in one of our clients, we analyzed just their remote desktop tools, so basically tools for the help desk to go in and basically take control over somebody's PC. They have 15 different ones in the environment, all being actively used. And when we looked at that, they were able to reduce it with one that they actually owned for free through one of their contracts that they could extend out to everybody. And they ended up, saving a few $100,000 a year by dropping those 14 products out of 14 of the 15 out of the environment. So this is definitely an opportunity now, is to start looking for the duplicate functionality and start figuring out which products you can remove. Kind of like an app rationalization type project. If you have the tools to do this, this can be useful, but you can also do this with some of your subscription licenses, because a lot of those a lot of the subscriptions, like the software as a services, you may be able to get data out of the APIs. I'm going to show you a specific example of this with Microsoft here in a couple of seconds. But I would suggest starting to review your usage and your metering. And if they haven't used the product in 90 days, go reclaim it. So if you don't have an opportunity to meter, maybe now's a good time to survey all those project users to see if they're actually using the product. And if they aren't, pull it back on the desktops, pull it off their desktops and put it back on the shelf, so to speak, so that at renewal time, or maybe it's an opportunity to go back and say, hey, Microsoft, we were running SA on 500 project licenses. We only need 200 of them. Can we reduce the 200, but if they say no from a revenue perspective, maybe then you can say, okay, well, can we take the 300 out and buy some Microsoft Voice, because we've got a lot of people working at home now with Teams, and so we'll just move their spend over there. Would you be willing to do that? And see if you can't have that conversation and negotiation. Those sorts of strategies do work. Like I said, they're not. It's not easy. It's hard work, but you can definitely do those sorts of things. Oh, and we did actually come up with an 11th one. And this one I think is really doable right now. I think a lot of the software vendors, particularly with COVID-19, are sort of, definitely open to the challenges that organizations are facing around budget cuts and lost revenue and things like that. And so, I would suggest that if you've got product or, contracts that have annual price increases in them, that you go back to all those vendors this year and negotiate that to zero this year. We're having some pretty good success with this strategy right now, where maintenance contracts that have 5% or consumer price indexed related price increases, or even Microsoft contracts for that matter, where they gave staggered discounts, where maybe they started with a 15% in year one, 10% in year two, 5% in year three. Can you go back and get them to say, hey, we're coming out of year two, going to year three, with the times things are challenging. Microsoft, can you please not implement the 5% reduction in discount? Can we hold at the 10% in year three, and have a negotiation around that? Again, they're not going to say yes right away, but you definitely can work strategies to make these sorts of things potentially work for you. But this is a one that's fairly easy to ask for and to work your vendors on. And one of the things that I want to say is, like, don't think of these tips as a single tactic. So a lot of the times people say, okay, well, I gotta go look at the maintenance reduction, right? And see if I can just cancel my maintenance. Well, maintenance reduction or cancellation, maybe you want to look at that around, also combining that other point around what products are in that maintenance that we aren't using. Can we drop those? So maybe I can't get a full reduction, but maybe I can drop them. Or, oh, there's a 5% annual price increase coming up with that. Our maintenance renewals in September. Let's go get that out now, so that we know it's out and we're not going to pay it in September because we've already budgeted for it, and we can put that 5% back in our budget type thing. So you definitely want to layer these things on top of each other. Do not think of them as a single tactic. Sort of go through and go, okay, here's the bunch of different ideas, and what can I use, and kind of combine them and put them together in whatever makes the most sense. But that's how you're gonna get some of the best results. Okay. So I'm gonna actually just kind of show you how a couple of these things might work in a Microsoft Office 365 scenario. So I'm just gonna switch to whoops. Make sure I show the right thing here. Okay. So this is a tool that we've developed in-house, that we take Office 365 reports out of the Office 365 portal and kind of combine them together and give you a view of a number of things. And I'm just going to walk through this real quickly here and kind of show you where there's opportunity in your your Office 365 licenses. When we do this with clients, we are typically finding 20 to 30% waste in spend on Office 365 on things that can actually be corrected and taken out of contracts. Now, again, it's timing wise on when you can actually realize those corrections, but there are definitely things here that you can see. And so this is just a demo account. So there's not a ton of data in here, but there's enough for me to show you sort of the types of things to be looking for. Okay. So one of the first things is you want to go and look for users with multiple subscriptions. So I can see here that I have one user in this data set that has multiple subscriptions. And so based on how we can do this, I can actually go and take a look at that user, and I can see that it's this service account here. This service account has both an Office 365 E3 and an Office 365 E1. So we're actually paying for two licenses for this user, okay? sorry, something. Okay, so we're actually paying for 2 licenses for this user here, and so we obviously shouldn't be, and so now we can go and reclaim one of these. So if they don't need the E3, I would suggest keeping the E1, but if they need the E3, take the E1 away from this user. Now, when we actually look at this with clients, we don't just see one, we see multiples here, and it's not it's very common. I would say probably about 80% of the Office 365 reports that we look at, people have multiple subscriptions assigned to the same user. It could be Office 365 ones like E3s and E1s like I showed. We see people with like a project plan 1 and a project plan 3, all kinds of different things. We see people with E5s and then assigned Power BIs. So there's all kinds of sorts of things that happen here. And so that's one thing you want to go and look for. The other thing that we want to look at is over here, you can see this customer has Office 365 E3. They've assigned 1,078 of those. And in this middle section here is the activity date, right? So 452 have used it in the last 30 days, you know, and it sort of falls off. Now, what we want to be looking for, again, this is a data set from a customer that was early on onboarding and things like that, but what we want to be looking at for is this usage out here in the greater than 90 days. If somebody hasn't used the application or used this in greater than 90 days, do they really need it? Okay. And so, sorry, I'm getting a question. Can you see, can somebody let me know in the chat, can they see the O365 screens or? Okay. So if in here, I'm looking for these ones that are greater than 90 days, because that's a good example of where I can go and reclaim them. So again, this wasn't a big client that we didn't have a lot of the data in our demo here, but you know, particularly we've seen people with hundreds of thousands of dollars of Project 365 and Visio 365 and Power BI licenses, all those sort of add-ons that they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on, and people aren't using them. So we can actually give them a list of who those are so that you can go out and claim them. So you want to go in and take a look at this. The other thing that we're looking for, and this was post cleanup, this data was not this good when we started working with this client, but blocked users is another one that we see. And so typically when you offboard somebody, you put them in block status so they still can't get in. A lot of the times those are there for 30 days. Microsoft lets you keep the data, but we see people that leave them there for 90, 120, 150 days. And so you want to go in and take a look at these blocked users. We've seen this as high as 15% of Office 365 spend that is in blocked users, no longer in your company, still paying for licenses. Now, some people say it's a legal hold thing. There's other ways to do it versus blocking E3s. And the one thing that I always say is, why do you got a project online blocked, right? So if we see project online and things like that in block status, we want to reclaim those licenses. So we either put them back in the pool and we can reassign those to somebody that needs them earlier, or with project online, like I mentioned earlier, because it's one of those additional online subscriptions, my anniversary can actually reduce those down to my actual usage. Okay. Now the next one that we see quite a bit are service account users. And again, we can show you how who all these people are, but you can look at the service account users to see where are non-humans being assigned licenses and do they actually need them. So again, there are some scenarios where the way technologies work, in order to make it work, you need to have it assigned a license, but that's not always the case. These things just get assigned license for random reasons. Somebody was testing something and they basically had to log on in order to use it, and then never took the subscription away, right? So again, go out and take a look there. Again, sometimes we see 5 to 10% of the licenses in service accounts. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people at Office 365, they'll say, Mike, we got 10,000 users, buying 12,000 licenses, what's going on? Usually it's somewhere in these three things, either these greater than 90 days that aren't using it, there's blocked users, there's service accounts. Other things that you may want to be doing is looking at and comparing your AD users to your O365 to see where there's users in O365 that aren't active in AD and vice versa. So there's a number of different things you can do here to save money. But this is a great example of, okay, if I have this data and I realize I can reduce out, $50,000, $60,000 of licenses or more sometimes. Now I can look at my contract and go, okay, my anniversary date's coming up in June. I got a 30 to 60 days note. Oh, I'm going to tell Microsoft I'm reducing this project online from 500 to 200, the Visio from, so now I actually have the data to go out and to do that. And now I can go and look at my contract to figure out if there are actual ways that I can do that. Okay, so that's just one example of a way to use data to accomplish that. Another thing that we could actually show in the O365 reports is here's your user profiles, right? So if we look at this company, for instance, based on their user profile, 269 users don't actually use an Office 365 license or hadn't at the time. So that was 21%. Their next biggest use case is just Exchange Online only. And so if they're buying E3s for all these people, they're overpaying and they've got a lot of shelfware. So you can start to take a look at your user profiles to go, okay, maybe I can just move these all to Exchange Plan 1s or sorry, E1s instead of E3s and start shuffling from the higher to the lower cost licenses. So again, another opportunity to look at ways to save money using data. And again, I would go in, look at my contract, read what my contract says about maybe shuffling from E3s to E1s, and seeing if I could potentially do that with a number of users. Maybe on my anniversary, I can move from E3 down to E1, or if the contract doesn't allow me because I don't have it set up in a way that I could do that, and there are ways that you could have potentially set up that you could have done that, then maybe I can go and negotiate that with Microsoft. So that's how we would use some of this data. Let's make sure I'm showing the right screen here. Yep. Okay. And so I want to talk about a real current scenario that we had with a client and just talk through how sort of all of this played together in a couple of different ways, how you can use this to combine sort of these different tactics that we've been talking about. So I had a client that came to me with a contract. It was for BPM software. I'd never even heard of the vendor, and quite honestly, I didn't even know what the software was doing. But basically, they found out that they had to do a $1.8 million new license buy, and they already had an annual support contract of $1 million, and it was unbudgeted for, and it was right in the time that all this sort of started back in February timeframe, January, February timeframe. And so they came and said, help, we don't have this budgeted. We don't know what to do. We think we owe it just based on what we know, but can you take a look at it? And so we went in and we looked at it. And the first thing we did was we actually looked at their contracts. We got their contract. It was 10 years old. We read through the contract. And we found that there were 4 different license metrics that they could use in the contract. And so when we looked at the purchase for the 1.8 million, we noticed that there were only 2 different license types on there. And so we asked them, why are you only buying the 2? And they didn't even know that there were 2 others in the contract because it was signed 10 years ago by people that were no longer in the company. So we reviewed the definitions of those 2 other license types with them. Talked through them, and we actually found out that without doing anything, we could reduce the spend by $600,000 just by taking advantage of these 2 other license types that were already in their contract. So, they were ready to cut a PO for 1.8 million just by reading through the contract, understanding it, and then finding these other license types. We were able to take out $600,000. So now we went and said, okay, let's take a look at the other 1.2 million. And we'll take a look at the 900,000 that you've currently been spending. And we talked to them about the data. So we actually went out, we had to pull a few reports out of their systems, a couple of different areas, because this was a user base with some device sort of mixed licensing and things like that. And so we created a custom report for them that showed all of their usage. And so what we found was their current run rate of 900,000, because of these other license types, that actually could get reduced by 200,000 or free up the equivalent of $200,000 of licenses. So we were able to take those users and buy the cheaper ones, and then take the licenses that they're already paying maintenance on and apply them to some of these other user types, or sorry, some of these other net new users that were making up the remaining 1.2 million. But the other thing that we noticed was that the reason that they really had this true up was there was a spike for 3 months in usage. And when we found out, it was an application that was coming online that would only be used once every fourth quarter. And they anticipated that every year, but so they were going to have to buy licenses for this spike of users for literally, it was about 90 days, not even, probably closer to about 60 or 45 days. But they had to pay for them for the full year. So we asked the vendor, said, okay, is there anything that we can do about this? Because we don't want to buy these licenses for and then pay support on them on top of that for this casual use scenario. And we found out that there was a subscription license. And so we were able to take a look at the cost of buying these licenses, paying maintenance on them versus just doing subscription. And we negotiated an additional license type of putting these other users on, these spiked users on a subscription contract. The net of it is that we took this $1.8 million buy down to 450K. Okay. And that was all by using data from a SAM perspective, where we went out and looked at deployment information, usage data. Again, it took a little bit to get it together, put it into a nice report so that we could actually analyze it. Then we analyzed it by looking at the contracts, figuring out what they were, and then actually going in and negotiating something new that wasn't in their contract, the subscription license. And we were able to get to something that was very satisfactory to the customer, because they were going to spend 1.8 and they only ended up spending 450K. And so that, as an example, is sort of how you can use this to sort of pull all of this together into a kind of a way of doing this. Again, we looked at probably 4 or 5 of those tips that we went through today in this scenario in order to help this client out. All right, well, excellent. Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks very much, everybody.